Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents Tough and Competent, Leadership and Team Chemistry by Eugene F. Kranz, narrated by Danny Campbell. Ultimately, leadership is not about glorious crowning acts. It's about keeping your team focused on a goal and motivated to do their best to achieve it, especially when the stakes are high and the consequences really matter. It's about laying the groundwork for others' success, and then standing back and letting them shine. Astronaut Chris Hadfield. Introduction. Captain Richard Champion de Crepney, A.M. Where were you when you heard about 9/11? I remember flying an Airbus A380 out of Darwin en route from Hong Kong to Sydney. Where were you when Neil Armstrong first stepped on the moon? I remember being in the school assembly hall watching the black and white live broadcast. 9/11 was shocking. The moon landing was extraordinary. Both significant emotional events changed the world and our lives. Both are etched clearly into my mind. The brain commits significant emotional events to long-term memory. We happily recall good events. Horrific events create trauma that can persist to our last breath. The three significant emotional events that significantly advanced technology in the 20th century were 2 world wars and NASA's space program. The wars allocated unlimited resources to improve aeronautics, electronics, and nuclear industries. Whilst we benefited from these new technologies, no one wants war as a catalyst for radical change. Memories of NASA's Apollo project were different. A bold and exciting mission to land a man on the moon and return him safely to Earth before the end of the 1960s. Although it was a politically motivated venture to assert presence in space, the politics ended there. Unlike warring nations, NASA was open in its missions, transparent in its delivery, and invited the world to participate. Anyone in the world could follow and share the progress of successes and failures of the Mercury, Gemini, and Apollo programs. I am Australian, and although we did not own or fund NASA, we followed NASA's mission to the moon as though it were our own. NASA's journey to the moon was a phenomenally expensive venture that changed the world, but the return on investment was priceless. Inertial navigation, fly-by-wire controls, rockets, trajectories, computers, communications, things we take for granted today, were all developed during missions. Skylab, the Shuttle, and the International Space Station are all derivatives from Apollo that continued discovery in space. Positive disruptors in energy, water, and transportation require national funding and exceptional leadership. To achieve earth-changing projects like these, funding, leadership, and teamwork at the scale of NASA's space program is imperative. Humanity needs another Apollo-type program to stimulate cohesion, creativity, adaptation, and success. A mission that every person wants, that creates something amazing and unites the world. To achieve the extraordinary, we don't just want resilient people who can survive a crisis. We need that special breed of human that defies the skeptics, rejects the status quo, rejects the imposter syndrome, seeks out the seemingly impossible task, then makes it happen. We need to bring out the best in humanity, for humanity. Today's world leaders are not as fearless as President Kennedy in 1961 when he announced the USA's space effort. The result is that humanity is not as resilient as we would wish it to be. In fact, humanity is brittle. Our mission must be to seek out the greatest challenges on Earth, projects that frighten us, with advanced technology that requires massive human participation and risk. We must take humanity where it has never been before, because the hardest challenges unite and advance us. In summary, to help the Earth, we need leadership, passion, discipline, competence, confidence, responsibility, teamwork, toughness, and grit. Gene's first book, Failure is not an option, is a chronicle of the Mercury, Gemini, and Apollo missions. It relates what happened during those remarkable times that changed the world. But this book left me questioning the hows and whys. Why did Kennedy announce his intent to put a man on the moon and back within just 9 years, when there were almost no skills, technology, and structures in place to do it? How much did it cost? What was Gene's leadership style, and how did he develop it? How did he build and lead multiple extraordinarily skilled teams with an average age of just 27 years? How could Gene ad-lib his prophetic words that became known as the Kranz dictum that changed the culture in NASA operations after the Apollo 1 fire? And why did Gene Kranz exceed his authority to make that speech when I think it was Chris Kraft's responsibility to deliver it? Tough and Competent is the logical successor to Gene's first book. It explains Gene's upbringing, which set his values and beliefs. These are his whys, that in turn determined his hows, that in turn determined his whats. When you listen to Tough and Competent, you'll understand the man, his roots, and the people that mentored him. You will understand why he is humble, yet sharp, fiercely determined, and with an incredible intellect. When you finally get the full spectrum of Kranz, the leader, then you will understand his thoughts and anticipate his actions and words. And when you grasp the gravitas of Kranz leading teams of extraordinary people that accomplished the impossible, then you will understand the critical reasons for NASA's success. I've discovered that most people in life seek boundaries and don't want to rock the boat. Yet the explorers, inventors, and doers that we respect are people that reject the status quo, question everything, trust their judgment, regularly break rules, and take on any challenge regardless of their orders. These leaders are eminent mentors that we would gladly give our lives to support, and their values are the ingredients for every person to reach their full potential to have a happy, meaningful, and respected life. Tough and Competent is the leadership and teamwork book for the 21st century. If you want to step into the arena to be not just a great leader but a world leader, then this is the book for you. If you want to understand the human factors, the chemistry, or it, to build and maintain extraordinary, dynamic, and resilient teams of experts, all sharing one common mental model of values, situational awareness, roles, tasks, and trust, and acting as one, then this is the book for you. If you are fearful of taking risks and want to feel bulletproof, not gun-shy, or courageous, because you are confident that whatever happens, that you have the procedures to do, or that you can create novel solutions to do the things required to survive, then this is the book for you. Finally, if you have a project to improve planet Earth, a project as visionary as NASA's Apollo project, which needs the right stuff in leadership and the right stuff in teamwork, a project that will create happy, significant emotional memories that humanity will never forget, then this is your guide. Captain Richard Champion de Crepney, A.M., Pilot in Command, Qantas Flight QF-32. Qantas, Flight 32, November 4th, 2010. Australian Richard de Crepney was pilot in command of an A380 Super Jumbo with 469 people on board when one of the 4 engines exploded. Energized shards of metal sliced through the wing and fuselage, cutting 650 wires, leaving gaping holes, damaging control systems, puncturing fuel tanks, and destroying half the networks. 21 of the 22 systems were affected. The captain and crew worked through a confusing cascade of over 100 computer messages and distracting alarms from the onboard computers. 2 hours later, with one engine out, severely overweight and with limited control, a landing was accomplished. With fuel leaking from the aircraft, white-hot brakes, and unable to shut down an engine, de Crepney kept passengers on board for 2 hours until it was safe to disembark with no injuries. Leadership and team chemistry were key elements in QF-32's success. De Crepney and his team ignored faulty checklists, created novel solutions, and used undocumented procedures to survive this black swan event. In the 2016 Australia Day honours, Richard de Crepney was made a member of the Order of Australia, AM, for his significant service to the aviation industry, both nationally and internationally, particularly to flight safety and to the community. Prologue. The Arena. It is not the critic who counts, nor the man who points out how the strong man stumbles, or where the doer of deeds could have done them better. The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena. President Theodore Roosevelt, Citizenship in a Republic. I was present in mission control for over 100 launches and lived by 2 simple principles. Treat every mission as if it was the first, and do what is best for the crews who fly. Mission control is a living organism, a complex structure of interdependent and subordinate elements whose relations and properties are largely determined by their function during the course of a mission. We are the first responders in spaceflight, accountable for all actions consistent with crew safety and mission success. Our work in manned spaceflight involves enormous energy, complex systems, operations in a vacuum, velocity measured in miles per second, null gravity, extreme temperatures, and on occasion split-second irreversible actions. Charles Murray, describing my work as flight director in his book Apollo, The Race to the Moon, states that it isn't just the authority and visibility that set the flight director apart, but the job itself. Know in technical detail one of the most complex machines ever made. Master a complex flight plan and a huge body of mission rules. Piece together tiny and often unconnected bits of information from multiple sources coming to you at the same time. Do this under the gaze of the world in situations that might give you only seconds to make life and death decisions. It was a job for not just anybody. It was a job that had no equal. It is here that I again became familiar with death. Indeed, it was an element of the life work I accepted, and in the course of my career I lost a number of good friends to tragic accidents. But I believe it is all part of living a life in the arena. Being in the arena means taking on risk, and it means failing from time to time. But there is no achievement without risk, and there is no success without failure. Many different images have been referenced to describe mission control. Chris Kraft, the conceptual architect, described it as a cathedral, and for many years I referred to it as the leadership laboratory that assembled the next generation for spaceflight. But I believe arena, as Teddy Roosevelt used it in a different time, is the best term we can use. Mission control as the place where individually and as a team we confronted the unexpected, sought to control risk, and reached to go further as explorers. In the arena we know the triumph of high achievements, Roosevelt wrote, and at the worst, if we fail, at least fail while daring greatly, so that our place shall never be with the cold and timid souls who know neither victory nor defeat. With the completion of the Gemini 12 mission in November 1966, I moved without pause to support the pending Apollo 1 launch in late January 1967. The intensity of the effort was not new. It was the way we had lived during Gemini. We were used to surrendering weekends and holidays. I received my first flight director assignment during Project Gemini. I now had 9 missions under my belt, and along with Chris Kraft and John Hodge, was selected for the Apollo 1 flight test. I had worked with Gus Grissom on early missions and did the planning for Ed White's extravehicular activity, EVA. Roger Chaffee was the new guy, a Navy pilot who during the Cuban Missile Crisis took pictures of the missile complexes. Shortly after midnight on January 27, 1967, I was again seated at Mission Control's Flight Director console in Houston, Texas, laboriously updating the launch pad test procedures with the last-minute changes sent over from Cape Canaveral in Florida, the Cape. I was tired from the previous day's plugs-in test with the backup crew, Wally Schirra, Don Isley, and Walt Cunningham. After a brief break from the prior day's test, I decided to remain throughout the early morning with ground controllers and the Cape communications team to sort out the communications problems we experienced in the previous day's test. Today's plugs-out test was a full rehearsal for the launch day countdown. Test power was applied at 7 a.m. CST, and the various spacecraft systems were activated. Except for some procedural changes, the test continued normally until close to noon, when I called craft, and we began our team handover for the crew insertion. With the countdown proceeding, I returned to the office. Throughout the afternoon, the Mission Control and Cape teams were plagued by a variety of problems, mostly communications and an unhappy crew. A hold was called at 6:27 p.m. CDT to prepare for power transfer. 4 minutes later, fire exploded in the spacecraft, and in a pure oxygen environment the temperature reached about 1,000 degrees. The 3 crew members, Grissom, White, and Chaffee, died in 17 seconds. The command module ruptured. All voice and data communications terminated 3 seconds after the rupture. Flames and gases flowed from the rupture and ignited other combustibles. In this inferno, attempts were made to remove the hatches, but they only opened inwards, and the heat from the fire made opening impossible. I was at home. LM Branch Chief Jim Hannigan, a neighbor, ran to our house and yelled, "There was a fire on the pad, and they think the crew is dead." I literally hopped in my car and tore off to Mission Control. Kraft had cut off all outside communications and locked the entrances. Finding the entrance locked, I went around to the freight elevator and up to the second floor. There was a deathly silence in the control room when I entered. Hodge was the first to speak to me. "It was gruesome," he said, clutching his pipe in his teeth as he tried to remain focused. Hodge knew death. He had been a boy during the London Blitz and a flight test engineer. Kraft finished talking to the surgeon, walked over and said, "Deke thinks we were lucky. When the spacecraft ruptured, there was molten metal dribbling out." John Llewellyn, a tough Marine who fought at the Chosin Reservoir in the Korean War, was without words. He and Dutch von Ehrenfried, controllers with whom I played judo, were crying. After a horrible hour, one by one the controllers left after securing the data, logbooks, and the video and voice tapes with the word "fire." We locked the control room doors and gravitated to the singing wheel, our watering hole, to begin our wake. The proprietor, Nelson Bland, cleared the building except for the controllers. Beer was on the house, and soon worried wives began showing up trying to take husbands home. The night was one of subdued, limited conversation. Controllers would start to talk, then shudder and break into tears. We mourned our crew and whatever naivete we had left. I had been through this before when we lost pilots. We would drink and sing our sad fighter pilot songs. We had no wives to take us home. Singing and drinking was our outlet. There were no songs in the singing wheel that night, and when we went home we were drained of emotion, changed in ways we could physically feel but not describe. The weekend felt infinite, the soul-searching intense and very personal. The television, newspapers, and calls from reporters across the nation amplified the pain. I don't know how the reporters got my phone number, but I finally unplugged the phone. Aviators have only 2 fears: fear of failure and fear of fire. I relived the crashes, the fires, and the times I saw men die. My only thought was how and why we failed the Apollo 1 crew. Highly graphic news came Saturday morning from Jules Bergman, the ABC space reporter. The test purpose, countdown, entering the hold, the power transfer followed by the flash in the cabin video camera, and the moment of death were described. With a cold wind blowing the flags at half-mast, at 2 a.m. the bodies were removed. After Sunday Mass I called Hodge, and we scheduled a briefing in the Building 30 auditorium for Monday. Monday, January 30th, 1967, followed a sleepless night. Hodge finished speaking, laying out the accident investigation team and schedule. As I climbed the stairs to the stage, the crew's words, "Fire in the cockpit," echoed in my mind and soured my gut. When I turned and looked at the sea of faces before me, I could feel their grief and their anger that someone had screwed up. Those seated before me, while Gemini veterans, were mostly young. We worked daily to control the risks inherent in our work and were well prepared to handle it in orbit. But this happened on the launch pad, and we had no way to help. Death was no stranger to me or to the fellow controllers who saw service in Korea. Most of the controllers had now experienced a friend's death for the first time, and now were acutely aware of the risks in our work. I was their leader, angry because someone screwed up, and our crew died. Harry Carroll, my flight test boss, taught me the words, "Light the fire." They express the most powerful force available to humanity. We can choose to use this force constructively with words of encouragement or destructively using words of despair. Words can heal or humble. Mine were intended to create an unstoppable drive. I had to get my controllers out of the shock and establish the mindset, never again. Resilience, unflagging determination, and conviction must now propel us toward our lunar goal. Whatever might happen in our gut, we could not nor cannot waver or lose sight of our cause. On stage, the words came to me. At Holloman, I had a card on my desk that showed a biplane crashed high into a tree with the caption, "Aviation, unlike the sea, is terribly intolerant of carelessness, incapacity, or neglect." I began speaking slowly, deliberately, and defined accountability. Spaceflight will never tolerate carelessness, incapacity, and neglect. Somewhere, somehow, we screwed up. It could have been in design, build, or test. Whatever it was, we should have caught it. We were too gung-ho about the schedule, and we locked out all the problems we saw each day in our work. Every element of the program was in trouble, and so were we. The simulators were not working. Mission control was behind in virtually every area, and the flight and test procedures changed daily. Nothing we did had any shelf life. Not one of us stood up and said, "Damn it, stop." I do not know what Thompson's committee will find as the cause, but I know what I find. We are the cause. We were not ready. We did not do our job. We were rolling the dice, hoping that things would come together by launch day, when in our hearts we knew it would take a miracle. We were pushing the schedule and betting that the Cape would slip before we did. I then gave my instructions for how we would respond to this tragedy. From this day forward, flight control will be known by two words, tough and competent. Tough means we are forever accountable for what we do, or what we fail to do. We will never again compromise our responsibilities. Every time we walk into mission control, we will know what we stand for. Competent means we will never take anything for granted. We will never be found short in our knowledge and in our skills. Mission control will be perfect. When you leave this meeting today, you will go to your office, and the first thing you will do there is to write tough and competent on your blackboards. It will never be erased. Each day when you enter the room, this phrase will remind you of the price paid by Grissom, White, and Chaffee. These words are the price of admission to the ranks of mission control. My controllers left the auditorium in silence, changed forever. Tough and competent entered our common vocabulary, and my address became known as the Kranz dictum. That day we developed the mindset and the individual fire to go to the moon. The day we landed on the moon, we would fulfill the pledge we made to Gus, Ed, and Roger. Beginning. 1. Foundation. No matter how bleak or menacing a situation may appear, it does not entirely own us. It can't take away our freedom to respond, our power to take action. Ryder Carroll. I was born in 1933 during the Great Depression in Toledo, Ohio. My father, a World War I veteran, died when I was 7 years old, and like many others of his time, he had no life insurance. One of my greatest losses is that I never got to know my father. One of my few recollections is him listening nightly to the radio as Edward Murrow reported on the German Blitz and the terror bombing of London. Toledo was a military transit hub, so after my father's death, my mother moved my 2 sisters and I to a home in West Toledo. We lived near the American Legion Hall, so she turned the home into a military boarding house to pay the bills. My mother was a strong German Catholic and a Republican. She set an example in all things and was tough because she needed to be tough. She had high expectations for her 3 children and sacrificed to provide them opportunities. Her gifts to her children were integrity, belief in themselves, and the drive to work for their dreams. My sisters were in their late teens. Louise had entered nursing school, and Helen would soon follow. Our street was mostly Polish-Irish, much like the Norman Rockwell's paintings of American culture that graced the Saturday Evening Post cover. Our neighbor, John McHugh, was an Irish cop who whistled as he walked home from the streetcar in his crisp blue uniform swinging a nightstick. The nuns from the nearby St. Agnes School reported discipline problems to McHugh, and one by one the kids got a little talking to. He was the surrogate father for the boys on the street whose fathers were fighting in the war. The Willis Overland Jeep plant was at the end of our street, and by the time we were in the 5th and 6th grade, one of the rites of passage was to take a Jeep from the storage lot, drive it between the rows of Jeeps to the test track, and down the hill to 10 Mile Creek. Another was to stand next to the railroad tracks at a curve and see who flinched first and stepped back as a steam locomotive passed. All in all, it was a fun place to grow up, and while many of us were bruised, none were broken. I was a paper boy, and every morning and evening as I ruled papers, I read the headlines. Extra editions were exciting. Walking the streets late at night or during the day, I would shout, "Extra! Extra! Read all about it!" Windows and doors opened and people asked, "What happened?" I gave them the news. Doolittle raid on Tokyo, or American sink Japanese fleet. Like the TV commentators today, we were part of American history, the first people to pass the news, and we felt important. My work as a paperboy taught me responsibility, like making sure that newspapers were delivered on time to every customer, regardless of weather and sickness. Keeping my bicycle working was simply a responsibility to accomplish my job. This simple task, to deliver a product to a customer, would put me on a path that prepared me for more demanding roles in my life. My mother crowded the family into a single bedroom, so we could take 3 to 5 boarders in the 2 remaining bedrooms, providing them 2 meals and washing their clothes. In the evenings, the GIs talked of the great land, sea, and air battles, bringing the war close to our home. Louise, my oldest sister, was blonde, lively, and always focused on a far horizon. When home from nursing school, she played songs of the 40s on the piano while listening to the radio, occasionally improvising with a bit of boogie-woogie. Helen was the flirt, a brunette with soft brown eyes, a hearty laugh, and a high school junior, which was the age of many of our soldiers. Mom lost 2 of her boarder sons, We hung a gold star in the window.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?